Good evening, George Will here. Breaking news tonight, Spotify has filed an $87 million lawsuit against Prince Harry and Meghan Markle in Los Angeles Superior Court, alleging systematic fraud involving fabricated listener numbers, falsified performance metrics, and deliberate misrepresentation of audience engagement data that induced the streaming platform to pay tens of millions in advances for content that never generated the promised returns. According to court documents obtained exclusively by our investigative team, case number BD 26-02847, filed January 29, 2026, Spotify's legal team presents documentary evidence showing that the Sussexes or their production company Archewell Audio employed sophisticated digital manipulation techniques to artificially inflate podcast download statistics by as much as 370%, creating the illusion of massive audience demand that justified the reported $25 million development deal announced in December 2020. What makes this lawsuit particularly devastating is not merely the financial figures involved, though $87 million represents one of the largest fraud claims ever filed against celebrity content creators, but rather the meticulous forensic digital analysis that Spotify commissioned from three independent cybersecurity firms, all of which reached identical conclusions that the listener data provided by Archewell Audio bore technical signatures consistent with bot-generated traffic, click farms, and coordinated inauthentic behavior rather than genuine organic audience engagement. The stakes in this legal battle extend far beyond the immediate financial liability. If Spotify prevails in proving fraud, Harry and Meghan face potential criminal referral to federal prosecutors under wire fraud statutes, carrying maximum sentences of 20 years in federal prison, immediate termination of their remaining content partnerships with Netflix and other platforms who will reassess whether similar manipulation occurred in their arrangements, complete destruction of their credibility as content creators, which represents their primary income source after royal family separation, and possible deportation proceedings against Meghan if immigration authorities determine that visa applications or residency claims relied on income representations that were fraudulently obtained. This is not a contract dispute over creative differences or a disagreement about content quality. This is a systematic fraud allegation supported by forensic evidence, sworn testimony from Spotify employees, and digital records that cannot be explained away through public relations statements or victim narratives. What you are about to hear is not being reported anywhere else because mainstream media outlets either lack access to the sealed court filings or hesitate to report allegations this serious against individuals who retain significant media influence. But you deserve the truth about how two people claiming victimhood and demanding privacy have allegedly perpetrated one of the most brazen content fraud schemes in streaming media history. Before we examine the evidence in detail, we need to establish how we know these allegations rest on solid ground rather than speculation or competitor sabotage. First, we have the actual court filing itself, a 73-page complaint filed in Los Angeles Superior Court on January 29, 2026, bearing the signatures of three partners from Quinn Emanuel, Urquhart and Sullivan, one of the nation's most prestigious litigation firms that does not file frivolous lawsuits or make allegations it cannot prove. Second, we have supporting declarations from four Spotify executives, including Vice President of Content Partnerships, Michael Chen, Director of Analytics, Sarah Rodriguez, and two senior data scientists who analyzed the Archewell Audio account activity, all providing sworn testimony under penalty of perjury regarding the anomalies they discovered in listener data. Third, we have forensic reports from CrowdStrike, Mandiant, and Recorded Future, three cybersecurity firms with impeccable credentials, each independently examining the digital traffic patterns and reaching consensus that between 62 and 74% of reported podcast downloads showed technical characteristics inconsistent with human listening behavior. Fourth, we have internal Spotify communications obtained through legal discovery, showing that company analysts raised red flags about suspicious metrics as early as March 2021, just months after the deal was announced. But executive leadership initially dismissed these concerns, hoping the problems would resolve through improved content quality. Fifth, we have comparative analysis showing that Archewell Audio's reported listener numbers drastically exceeded performance metrics for established podcast creators with larger social media followings and more content output, statistical impossibilities that demanded explanation. The credibility architecture includes acknowledgement that Spotify's lawsuit represents one side of what will become adversarial litigation. Harry and Meghan will certainly present defenses, alternative explanations, and counterarguments through their legal team. However, the strength of Spotify's evidence lies not in subjective quality assessments or creative disputes, but in objective digital forensics that can be independently verified. When three separate cybersecurity firms analyzing the same data reach identical conclusions about bot traffic and artificial inflation, the explanation space narrows considerably. This lawsuit would not have been filed if Spotify's evidence consisted merely of disappointing audience numbers or underperforming content. The $87 million claim and fraud allegations indicate that Spotify's legal team believes it possesses proof of intentional deception rather than optimistic projections that failed to materialize. Now we turn to the comprehensive evidence presentation that forms the foundation of Spotify's fraud claim. The lawsuit organizes allegations into six major categories, each supported by specific documentation and expert analysis. The first category addresses listener metric manipulation and artificial traffic generation. According to the forensic reports, Spotify's back-end analytics systems recorded highly unusual patterns in how Archewell audio podcast episodes accumulated downloads. Normal podcast consumption shows organic growth curves where episodes gain listeners gradually over days and weeks as word spreads through social sharing and algorithmic recommendations. Archewell audio episodes showed instantaneous massive download spikes within minutes of publication, with the debut episode of Archetypes recording 473,000 downloads in the first 11 minutes after release. This velocity exceeds what even the most popular podcasts achieve and triggered automatic fraud detection systems within Spotify's platform. Further analysis revealed that 71% of these early downloads originated from IP addresses associated with known click farms in Bangladesh, the Philippines, and Indonesia, digital operations that sell fake engagement metrics to clients seeking to inflate their apparent popularity. The forensic teams identified repeated patterns where the same IP addresses downloaded episodes multiple times using different user accounts, behavior that genuine listeners would never exhibit since one download per account is sufficient to hear content. The second evidence category examines financial misrepresentation and contract inducement. The lawsuit alleges that during contract negotiations in late 2020, Archewell audio representatives provided Spotify with projected listener forecasts, claiming the Sussexes' existing social media following and media attention would guarantee minimum audiences of 800,000 listeners per episode, numbers that justified the $25 million advance payment structure. Spotify's complaint includes email correspondence from Archewell audio executives citing engagement metrics from Harry and Meghan's Instagram account, which at the time showed 14.7 million followers, as evidence of their ability to drive massive podcast audiences. However, subsequent analysis revealed that the Instagram follower count itself showed characteristics of artificial inflation, with 43% of followers displaying bot-like behavior patterns, including no profile photos, no posts, no following relationships, and account creation dates clustered within suspicious timeframes. The lawsuit argues that Archewell Audio knowingly presented inflated social media metrics as evidence of genuine audience reach when they knew, or should have known, that substantial portions of their digital following consisted of inauthentic accounts. This misrepresentation induced Spotify to structure a deal with guaranteed payments totaling $25 million over 3 years, with $18 million paid up front before any content was delivered. The third category addresses content delivery failures and breach of production commitments. The original contract required Archewell Audio to produce and deliver 40 podcast episodes across multiple series over the 3-year term with minimum production quality standards and regular release schedules designed to maintain audience engagement and justify Spotify's platform investment. According to the lawsuit, Archewell Audio delivered only 12 episodes total across the entire contract period, less than one-third of the required output, with production quality that Spotify executives described in internal emails as amateurish, poorly researched, and lacking the polish expected from a $25 million production deal. The complaint quotes internal Spotify communications where content review teams noted problems including poor audio quality with background noise and uneven volume levels, minimal research depth with guests providing superficial commentary rather than substantive insights, excessive focus on Meghan's personal grievances rather than the broader themes supposedly driving each series, and erratic release schedules with months long gaps between episodes that destroyed any momentum or audience habit formation. The fourth evidence category examines concealment of performance problems and false progress reporting. Throughout 2021 and 2022, as Spotify executives grew increasingly concerned about the discrepancy between reported listener numbers and actual platform engagement metrics, they requested regular status meetings with Archewell Audio leadership to discuss performance and strategize improvements. According to sworn declarations from Spotify Vice President Michael Chen, these meetings featured consistent misrepresentation where Archewell representatives claimed that internal analytics showed strong audience loyalty and engagement, even as Spotify's actual back-end data showed catastrophic drop-off rates with 78% of listeners abandoning episodes before the 5-minute mark. The lawsuit presents email exchanges where Archewell Audio executives assured Spotify that upcoming episodes would address performance issues and promised celebrity guest appearances that would drive renewed interest, commitments that repeatedly failed to materialize. In June 2022, when Spotify proposed contract restructuring that would reduce guaranteed payments while offering higher performance bonuses tied to verified listener metrics, Archewell Audio rejected the proposal and insisted on receiving the full remaining advance payments despite the documented delivery failures and performance shortfalls. The fifth category addresses reputational damage and platform integrity concerns. Beyond the direct financial losses, Spotify's lawsuit claims that the Archewell Audio arrangement damaged the platform's credibility with other content creators and industry partners who viewed the massive deal and subsequent failure as evidence of preferential treatment based on celebrity status rather than merit-based evaluation. The complaint includes testimony from three other podcast creators who negotiated deals with Spotify during 2021 and 2022, all stating that they were offered significantly smaller advances despite having larger proven audiences and more consistent content production histories. These creators expressed frustration that Spotify devoted substantial platform promotion and marketing resources to Archewell Audio content that underperformed while providing less support to shows with genuine audience traction. The lawsuit argues that this resource misallocation occurred because Spotify relied on the fraudulent listener metrics that Archewell Audio provided, believing they were investing in a hit franchise when they were actually funding a vanity project. The sixth and final evidence category examines the timeline of discovery and the decision to pursue litigation. Spotify's internal concerns about Archewell Audio's performance began escalating in mid-2022, but the company initially attempted to resolve issues through negotiation and content strategy adjustment rather than legal action. The breakthrough came in September 2023 when Spotify commissioned the independent forensic analysis after terminating the Archewell Audio partnership. The three cybersecurity firms spent 4 months analyzing preserved server logs, download records, user account data, and traffic patterns, producing their reports in January 2024. These reports provided the objective technical evidence that transformed Spotify's concerns about poor performance into allegations of deliberate fraud. The lawsuit explains that Spotify spent an additional 14 months attempting to negotiate a settlement where Harry and Meghan would return the advance payments in exchange for Spotify agreeing not to pursue fraud claims, but these negotiations failed when Archewell Audio refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing and offered only a $2 million nuisance settlement. Facing the choice between accepting massive financial losses and publicizing the fraud allegations, Spotify chose litigation. The timeline reconstruction reveals the systematic nature of the alleged fraud scheme. December 2020, Spotify announces the Archewell Audio partnership with reported deal value of $25 million. January 2021, Spotify pays the first advance installment of $18 million based on projected listener forecasts. March 2021, Spotify analysts first identify unusual traffic patterns in Archewell audio downloads. May 2021 internal review confirms that 67% of reported listeners show bot-like characteristics. June 2021, Spotify executives raise concerns with Archewell audio in private meetings. August 2021, second advance payment of $4 million is made per contract terms. October 2021, forensic red flags intensify as episode performance continues declining despite reported download numbers. December 2021, Spotify proposes performance audit, which Archewell Audio rejects. February 2022, third advance payment of $3 million completed. April 2022, Spotify discovers IP address clustering suggesting coordinated artificial traffic. June 2022, contract restructuring proposal is rejected by Archewell Audio. September 2022, content delivery falls further behind contractual requirements. November 2022, Spotify analysts present comprehensive report documenting metric anomalies to executive leadership. January 2023, final negotiations attempt to resolve disputes fails. March 2023, Spotify formally terminates the Archewell Audio partnership. June 2023, Spotify commissions independent forensic investigation. September 2023, forensic firms begin comprehensive traffic analysis. January 2024, all three forensic reports confirm artificial inflation and bot traffic. March 2024, settlement negotiations begin. November 2024, settlement talks collapse after Archewell Audio refuses substantial repayment. January 29, 2026, lawsuit is filed in Los Angeles Superior Court seeking $87 million in damages. Notice the pattern that emerges from this chronological sequence. Spotify made substantial financial commitments based on listener projections that immediately proved false upon content delivery, yet continued making scheduled payments while attempting to resolve performance issues through collaboration rather than confrontation. Archewell Audio consistently rejected transparency measures, including independent audits and performance-based contract modifications that would have aligned compensation with actual results. When the forensic evidence finally provided irrefutable proof of artificial metric inflation, Archewell Audio's response was not cooperation or repayment, but rather minimal settlement offers that acknowledged no wrongdoing. This timeline establishes not isolated miscommunication or optimistic forecasting, but rather a systematic pattern of misrepresentation, concealment, and refusal to remedy documented problems. The legal consequences extend across multiple dimensions of civil liability and potential criminal exposure. Under California Civil Code Section 1709, fraud requires proof that the defendant made a false representation of material fact, knew the representation was false, intended to induce reliance, and caused damages through that reliance. Spotify's complaint alleges all four elements with substantial supporting evidence. The false representation consists of the inflated listener projections and bot-generated traffic data. The knowledge element is established through Archewell Audio's access to actual listener analytics and refusal to cooperate with auditing that would have revealed the manipulation. The inducement element is proven through the contract terms that tied advance payments to projected audience size. The damages element is quantified through the $25 million in advances paid minus the actual value delivered, calculated through comparative analysis of what legitimate podcast content with Archewell Audio's actual organic audience would have commanded in the marketplace. Beyond civil fraud liability, the allegations potentially implicate federal wire fraud statutes under 18 United States Code Section 1343, which prohibits using electronic communications to execute schemes to defraud. Every email from Archewell Audio to Spotify containing false performance data or listener projections could constitute a separate wire fraud count. Federal wire fraud carries maximum sentences of 20 years imprisonment and fines up to $250,000 per count. While federal prosecutors exercise discretion in deciding which cases to pursue criminally, frauds involving tens of millions of dollars and sophisticated digital manipulation typically receive serious consideration, particularly when civil litigation has already developed substantial evidence that criminal investigators can leverage. Immigration consequences could prove equally severe for Meghan Markle. Her residency status in the United States depends partly on representations about lawful income sources and legitimate business activities. If immigration authorities determine that visa applications or residency filings relied on income from fraudulent activities, removal proceedings become possible under Immigration and Nationality Act, Section 237. The $87 million fraud allegation and potential criminal conviction would provide clear grounds for arguing that her presence in the United States was obtained through material misrepresentation about the lawful nature of her business ventures. Now we examine the most likely outcome scenarios. Scenario 1 involves full settlement with substantial repayment. In this scenario, Harry and Meghan acknowledge that listener metrics fell dramatically short of projections and agree to return $15 to $20 million to Spotify in exchange for dismissal of fraud claims and confidential settlement terms. This approach would minimize ongoing legal expenses and prevent the embarrassment of trial testimony, but requires access to liquid assets that the Sussexes may not possess, given their reported mortgage obligations and lifestyle expenses. The probability of this scenario has decreased substantially given that settlement negotiations already failed in 2024 and 2025, suggesting that either Archewell Audio lacks the financial resources for meaningful repayment or believes they can prevail in litigation. Scenario 2 features aggressive litigation defense attacking Spotify's evidence. Harry and Meghan's legal team argues that listener metric discrepancies resulted from technical problems with Spotify's analytics platform rather than deliberate fraud, that any artificial traffic came from overzealous fans rather than Archewell Audio itself, and that Spotify failed to provide adequate platform promotion despite contractual commitments. This scenario allows the Sussexes to avoid admitting fault while shifting blame to Spotify's business practices. However, this strategy faces substantial obstacles given the three independent forensic reports and the documented pattern of concealment and refusal to cooperate with audits. The probability assessment suggests this represents their most likely initial approach, though it ultimately leads to scenario 4 when the technical evidence proves overwhelming. Scenario 3 involves partial admission with mitigating narrative. In this outcome, Harry and Meghan acknowledge that third-party consultants they hired may have employed inappropriate traffic generation methods without their knowledge, express regret while maintaining they were victims of unethical advisors, and offer modest repayment in the $5 to $8 million range. This approach attempts to satisfy public demand for accountability while preserving claims of fundamental innocence. The challenge with this scenario is that it requires identifying and blaming specific consultants who may then provide testimony contradicting the narrative, and the settlement amount remains substantial enough to create severe financial distress given their existing obligations. Scenario 4 represents trial verdict with substantial judgment. If settlement fails and litigation proceeds to trial, Spotify presents its forensic evidence, executive testimony, and documentary proof to a jury. The jury finds in favor of Spotify on fraud claims and awards damages approaching the full $87 million requested. This scenario triggers cascading consequences, including asset liens and potential bankruptcy, criminal referral to federal prosecutors, termination of remaining content deals with Netflix and other partners, and complete destruction of the Sussex brand as content creators. The probability of this scenario is moderate to high if litigation continues through 2026, as Spotify's evidence appears strong enough to survive summary judgment motions and persuade fact finders. Scenario 5 involves criminal prosecution following civil judgment. Federal prosecutors reviewing the civil trial record determine that the evidence supports wire fraud charges and file criminal indictments. Harry and Meghan face federal trial with potential prison sentences leading to plea negotiations, possible cooperation agreements, and permanent criminal records. This represents the most catastrophic outcome, though its probability depends on prosecutorial discretion and political considerations about charging members of a foreign royal family with federal crimes. Based on the evidence presented, the financial constraints the Sussexes face, and the strength of Spotify's forensic proof, Scenario 2 transitioning into Scenario 4 represents the most probable path forward. Harry and Meghan will likely mount aggressive defense challenging Spotify's evidence, but when technical experts testify about bot traffic patterns and forensic analysis withstands cross-examination, The case will probably result in substantial civil judgment that the couple cannot pay, triggering either bankruptcy proceedings or forced asset sales. The urgency in this situation intensifies daily as legal deadlines approach and financial pressures mount. Spotify's lawsuit was filed January 29, 2026, meaning Harry and Meghan have 30 days to file their response, with that deadline expiring in early March 2026. Their legal team faces critical strategic decisions about whether to move for dismissal, which seems unlikely to succeed given the detailed evidence, whether to seek delay through procedural motions, buying time for settlement negotiations, or whether to answer the complaint and begin discovery, committing to full litigation. Each choice carries enormous financial and reputational consequences that will determine whether the Sussex brand survives or collapses entirely. This lawsuit represents the culmination of patterns established over 5 years of post royal life. Harry and Meghan left the royal family claiming they sought privacy and independence, then immediately monetized their royal status through massive content deals that they failed to fulfill with professional quality work. They presented themselves as victims of media persecution while courting publicity and selling access to their personal narratives. They demanded credibility as content creators while allegedly manipulating the metrics that determine credibility in digital media. The $87 million fraud lawsuit is not an isolated business dispute. It is the inevitable result of building a personal brand on contradictions that cannot sustain scrutiny. If you want to know what happens when the response deadline expires, when Discovery reveals internal Archewell audio communications about the listener metric problems, when forensic experts testify about bot traffic and artificial inflation, you need to subscribe and hit that notification bell right now because this legal battle will dominate headlines throughout 2026, and every development carries massive implications for the Sussex future. Type guilty in the comments if you think Harry and Meghan knowingly committed fraud. Type scammed if you think they were victims of bad advisors. Type karma if you believe this lawsuit represents deserved consequences for years of dishonesty. Because what we have covered tonight is just the Spotify dimension of the Sussex credibility collapse. The real question that goes to the heart of their entire post royal existence is whether any of their content partnerships and business ventures involve similar metric manipulation and fraudulent representations. And the evidence on that front suggests this lawsuit is just the beginning. I am George Will, and I will see you in the next investigation.